to do it as fast as I can. But what I want to do is link for you what you're trying to accomplish in the brain with what you're trying to accomplish in trauma treatment. Make these align, because I think it's going to give you confidence when you look back here at this trauma treatment roadmap and you're like, well, gosh, you know, I'm just focusing on attuning to them and building the alliance, but what am I actually really doing? Well, I want to show you what you're actually doing and give you confidence that what you're doing is actually helpful. Okay, let me give you the rundown. Okay, neuroscience of trauma. I'm going to tell you the truth, but I'm not going to tell you the whole truth. Definitely not in the next 10 minutes. Different areas of the brain do different things, okay, are involved or in different types of functions. I know you probably know that, even with no neuroscience background. There are 5 main areas of the brain that tend to be implicated in trauma. Okay, and these are areas of the brain that are involved in actually different types of mental health conditions. Prefrontal cortex, amygdala, cingulate, insula, hippocampus. I'm going to move my cursor over each as I'm talking about them. I'm going to start at the bottom of the brain. Okay, so look at this picture of the brain. This is a sagittal view, known as a side view. So this would be like if I'm looking to the side, like this, okay? That's a side sagittal view. So this would be the person's forehead, and this would be the person's face, and here's the spinal cord. You have in the brain, it's going to be super simplistic, lower areas and upper areas, right? Lower areas of the brain, upper areas of the brain. Generally speaking, the lower in the brain you go, the more likely it is that those brain areas are involved in survival. Okay, so low areas are for survival. These low areas are oftentimes also outside of conscious awareness or conscious control. Okay. As you move up in the brain, you get closer to what we call cortical or upper areas that are within conscious awareness and conscious control. So 5 areas of the brain that are involved in trauma. Okay, first of all, amygdala. Now, it's actually a lot smaller than that. I made the circle bigger, but it's a tiny area. Its job is to detect threat and danger. Bessel van der Kolk calls this the smoke alarm or the smoke detector of the brain. In PTSD, it's cranked up, okay, like a dimmer switch. So something benign happens, or there's a noise that the person hears, but it's nothing dangerous. But the amygdala is hyper-reactive in PTSD. So what happens is they startle really easily. The amygdala hyper-reacts to situations. So what that means is that someone with PTSD feels on guard and hyper-vigilant and easily startled. Okay, so that amygdala is essentially saying, oh my gosh, something bad is happening, danger, 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 even when there's no danger present. So I put here that we want to decrease activation in PTSD in the amygdala. That's what we're aiming to do, decrease amygdala activation. Super simple. Go to the hippocampus. Actually, the placement of this is slightly off. I apologize. The hippocampus, you can think of this as the long-term memory storage unit of the brain. Now, memory is super complex in the brain, but we know the hippocampus is strongly involved in storing memories that you can actually remember. Okay, so the best birthday present you ever got or the worst thing that ever happened to you, if you can remember it, it's in the hippocampus. What happens, though, is that when you're under extreme stress or experiencing traumatic events, the hippocampus, parts of it turn off and it actually becomes underactivated. And what that does is it impacts how traumatic memories are encoded and stored in the brain. And it can also impact how your memory works outside of that traumatic event. So people with anxiety disorders or PTSD a lot of times report memory impairment, long-term memory impairment. Main issue here is that after trauma, the hippocampus may be underactive. Okay, I won't go into why in this presentation, but it actually shuts off when we want it to turn on. So the amygdala, we don't want that thing to be super cranked up, but it is in PTSD. So we want to decrease it. Hippocampus, though, memory center, it's not online enough. So in our PTSD treatment, we want to increase activation of the hippocampus. When you increase activation of the hippocampus, you are able to consolidate and reconsolidate memories better. So if you want to increase hippocampal activation, a great thing to do is like EMDR or prolonged exposure. Any sort of exposure-based or trauma-focused treatment where you're having to work with the memories really help the hippocampus. Okay. That's 2 areas of the brain. Third area of the brain in trauma that is affected, an area called the insula. Okay, this is kind of a little known area. Super cool area though. The insula is the area of the brain that allows you to feel into your body, feel into internal experiences. So if you notice that your heart is racing, that's interoception. Okay, that's what it means to be able to feel into the body. The insula is the area of the brain that helps you feel into the body. In trauma and PTSD, this thing can shut off, creating numbing symptoms and contributing to dissociation. So we think of dissociation as being when people leave the present moment, but really also they're leaving themselves. They're leaving their body. It's like the brain and the body are disconnecting. Okay, so the insula is what's responsible for keeping you here in the present moment, grounded and noticing what's going on inside of you. So what we want to do is we want to increase activation of the insula. Super quick caveat, if you're into the insula research with PTSD and you see findings of the insula being overactive, okay, that's why I put the question mark here, is because it's a little bit complicated actually with the insula. Real quick, know that when the insula has been found to be overactive, it's when people are faced with trauma reminders. So if someone is re-experiencing in some way a traumatic event, maybe they see something on TV and it's a sexual assault scene of a movie. I can't stand that we put that stuff in movies. And they start to feel really anxious in the body and they notice those terrible sensations. The insula will actually be hyperactive in those situations. So what happens with the insula essentially is that it's turned off or it's really lowly activated where people are not in their body, they're not really present until they re-experience the horrors of a traumatic event. Then the insula increases and you feel essentially in the body something that's similar to how you felt at the time of the trauma. And then after that's done, that episode's done, you go back to nothing, basically. Okay. But overall, what we're wanting to help clients do with PTSD is increase the activation of the insula so that they feel more like themselves. I refer to it as coming back to yourself. Okay, so you're more in your body, you're aware of how you feel and what's going on inside of you. Okay, area number 4 of the brain, cingulate cortex. Okay, this area does a whole bunch of stuff. Long and the short of it for our purposes, the cingulate cortex, this is the higher area of the brain, okay? There's a piece of the cingulate that's involved in emotion regulation. This is a cortical area. The problem with trauma and PTSD is that the cingulate essentially gets turned down or off. What that means is that it's really hard to regulate emotion. So what we want to do is we want to increase activation of the cingulate so that people feel more in control of their own reactions. They're more able to control emotions, but also thoughts and behaviors. Okay, last but not least, prefrontal cortex, right here behind your forehead. Huge area. It does at least 20 different things. But these are the areas in the prefrontal cortex that are involved in logical, rational thinking, problem solving, decision making, intentional conscious thought, right here. Call this executive functions. We want this to be strong, but a lot of times in PTSD, research has shown that it is not. It is also turned down or turned off, much like the cingulate. So what that means is that if someone is really triggered who has PTSD, it means that they can't think straight. Okay, and then they might feel bad later for whatever they said or did, or they might not even really remember it. They're not using their thinking brain. So that old saying that like somebody lost their mind, like, oh, he's going to go lose his mind over that. I know it can sound sort of pejorative, but in a way it's actually true that what happens is these areas get shut down when you get overwhelmed. And part of this is actually because of the amygdala. And so you do lose your mind. You lose your rational, logical thinking. So what we want to do in trauma treatment in general is we want to increase this. We want people to feel in control of themselves. Okay, we want them to be able to think clearly and make good decisions. We want them to be able to focus. We want them to be able to sleep. So we want to strengthen these areas up here. We want to strengthen the insula where they can feel into the body so they know what's going on inside of themselves, because then maybe they can begin to regulate it. We want a strong memory center of the brain. And then we also want this amygdala, threat and danger center, to be cranked down so that it's not running the show and they're not overreacting to benign stimuli, essentially. So this is really what we're trying to do in trauma treatment. Linking this